Hello, I'm delighted to be here. So there are a lot of alarming trends and incidents that we've been talking about, and rightly so, over the last 2.5 days. But I'm fortunate now that I have the opportunity to focus on something that is really going right and provides an exemplar of how we want and need our elected leaders to approach anti-Semitism. ADL wrote a letter this past March to congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle, urging them to work together to combat anti-Semitism and to stem the growing partisan weaponization of this issue. The fight against anti-Semitism must remain apolitical, not hyper-political, or else it undermines the credibility of those brave champions who stand up to protect the Jewish people against violence and hate. For too many on the left or the right, these days seek out opportunities to bash the other party as anti-Semitic or as anti-Semites, while irresponsibly downplaying cases of anti-Semitic language or dog whistling when it's used on their own side of the aisle. This, I fear, is only going to get worse as we go into the election year. And that's why we want to commend to you the responsible and consensus-building work of the House of Representatives Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism. As we wrote to the House and Senate leaders this March and distributed to every member of Congress, ADL has been working with the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism for several years and sees it as a model of how to come together to address anti-Semitism. Republicans and Democrats have chosen to use this vehicle to look for common ground in fighting this scourge. We strongly urge members of both parties in the House and the Senate to look for ways to come together rather than work at cross purposes in what is a real fight against a real threat targeting Americans across the political spectrum. The leaders that I'm about to present rewards to don't agree with each other on all policies, but what they do is come together to combat anti-Semitism, and that's a lesson for all coalitions, for democratic pluralism, and for workable government, and it is utterly crucial in these times. As such, ADL has decided to honor the 8 co-chairs of this important House task force, half of whom are Democrats and half of whom are Republicans. They are role models and sustain a vehicle for ensuring that the fight against anti-Semitism remains an overwhelmingly bipartisan priority for many years to come. We thank all of the members of this task force in the House, encourage those who are not yet members to become so, and encourage members of the Senate to consider creating a similar task force in a timely manner. We are honoring the eight of the co-chairs of this task force in particular, and we're thrilled to have 6 of them here with us today. Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey, Representative Eliot Engel of New York, Representative Ted Deutch of Florida, Representative Marc Veasey, we have some constituents here, I see, Representative Wendy Weber of Texas, and Representative Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. The other 2 co-chairs of this task force, Representative Nita Lowey of New York and Representative Kay Granger of Texas, are unfortunately unavailable to join us today because of pressing scheduling conflicts. But of course, they're both being granted this award today as well, and we plan to deliver it to them personally very soon. We're going to be lucky enough to be hearing from 6 of the great leaders of this important institution today. I'm going to invite each of them onto the stage in a minute to receive their award and then have a seat on the conversation couch. I will also moderate a brief panel. It has to be brief because they're all running to a vote at 1:50, I hear, on the couch about their task force important achievements and ongoing work. Although once the 6 esteemed co-chairs have each received their awards, I want to first turn to them for a minute or so of remarks, starting with Representative Smith, because he needs to rush off particularly quickly to oversee a congressional hearing on eradicating Ebola. Please join me in welcoming each of these 6 co-chairs of the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism. And this is great because I get to have Jonathan B. Vanna White and get the award. Congressman Chris Smith. Congressman Smith represents the 4th Congressional District of New Jersey, and I must divert here. He represents my hometown of Fairhaven, New Jersey, where my mother still lives, Congressman Smith. So, and he co-chairs the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. Congratulations, sir. Thank you. So have a seat, and we'll turn to you first as soon as we can. Congressman Eliot Engel represents New York's 16th Congressional District and chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman. Congressman Ted Deutch represents Florida's 22nd Congressional District and chairs the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on the Middle East, North Africa, and International Terrorism. Oh, Congressman Deutch, our friend. Congressman Marc Veasey represents the 33rd Congressional District of Texas and is a strong advocate of civil rights and against hate in the House, who's joined as a co-chair this year. And Congressman Randy Weber represents the 14th Congressional District of Texas and is ranking member of the House Science, Space, and Technology Subcommittee on Energy. Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, another newcomer to co-chairing this task force, represents Pennsylvania's 1st Congressional District and is an incredibly important voice for bipartisanship in the House. Because Congressman Smith has to go very quickly, let me start with you and see if you have a minute or two to say anything about. I think you can stay where you are if you want, or come up.
Eileen, thank you very much. Is this on? Thank you very much. It is a distinct honor to be here with such great members of Congress who care deeply. You know, bipartisanship is not dead, as you can see. This is one issue that brings us together. And Eileen, I just want to say to you, since you have family in New Jersey, what exit? Those from New Jersey will understand that. It is really a privilege to be here. You know, very briefly, I got my start. I've been in Congress now for 39 years. And in my first term, second year, 1982, traveled to the Soviet Union on behalf of Soviet Jews, went to Moscow, Leningrad, spent 10 days there, and learned firsthand what government-sponsored anti-Semitism is all about. To see it, a few years later, I went to Perm Camp 35, which was really the infamous gulag where Natan Sharansky was. He had just gotten out. We videotaped everybody that was there. And when he saw the tape, he said, "They are my friends." So moved was he. I've worked on anti-Semitism my entirety of my career in Congress. It is a fundamental part of all of our human rights agenda, core of it. And I have to tell you, it is getting worse worldwide. You know that. The statistics will clearly show it, both domestically and in Europe, Middle East, and all over the world. So we need to raise our voices, legislation that will put, hopefully, an end to it. Sharansky once came to one of my hearings and testified. I had 9 of them on combating anti-Semitism. And he said, you know, in addition to traditional anti-Semitism, there's another horrific manifestation of it. And that is the hatred of Israel. And it's 3 Ds, as he called it: demonization, delegitimization, and double standard. We see the double standard all over the world, particularly at the United Nations, where the Israelis are picked out, when other countries like Sudan and the People's Republic of China get a slap on the wrist. Israel is always in the crosshairs. And of course, the delegitimization and demonization is ever present. Your presence here today, your leadership makes all the difference in the world. It inspires everyone to do more, to work across the aisle, as we are doing now, to make sure that we combat it every time and everywhere it manifests its ugly face. So thank you, Eileen, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Representative. So we'll go from your right, and if everybody wants to say a minute or two before I will then ask you some questions. But Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. You never ask an elected official if he or she wants to speak. The answer is always yes. So thank you. The Anti-Defamation League is legendary, and I feel like I want to pinch myself sitting up here in front of all of you. And the one wonderful thing about the Anti-Defamation League is they fight for the rights of all people. Although it's been prominently fighting for the rights of Jewish people, it's fighting for the rights of all people, because ADL never looked to see what the background was of the person. If there was injustice, ADL was there. You know, I grew up as a little kid and I remember when growing up, some people were talking about the Holocaust and saying, you know, don't think that it couldn't happen here. There are a lot of people who have hatred in their minds. And I remember thinking about it and thinking, well, it really couldn't happen here because, you know, America is a country of freedom and liberty and all the things that we know in our heart. Well, we're seeing an uptick of anti-Semitism and anti-everything else. And if we think, or if any group thinks that somehow or another, if it's being perpetrated against a group but not my group, we don't have a fight in the game. And that's not true, because obviously, as you know, what's bad for one group is bad for all groups. And so the thing that we have to continue to work for, and you see we're a bunch of bipartisan people, and bipartisanship is really at its best when we fight the scourge of anti-Semitism or racism or Islamophobia or anything like that. We put our heads together and we say, this is the United States of America. We're not going to tolerate any kind of injustice against any group, because if there's injustice against one group, there's injustice against all groups. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you. And Representative Deutch.
Thanks so much for this great honor. It's been a couple of decades, I think, since I went through the GLI leadership program in South Florida. And to think that I have the opportunity to join you here as a member of Congress, as a co-chair of the Anti-Semitism, the Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism, is a real thrill. I just want to thank you. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank your leadership. I want to thank Jonathan, all of you, for the magnificent way that you stand up to hatred wherever it is, and that you call it out by name. The statistics are clear. You know them. So many of the statistics we rely upon, the data that ADL provides us. But whether it's a hearing that we hold to highlight the rise of the far right, or a hearing that we hold to raise the specter of the anti-Israel left, the ADL is always there because it understands the threat, and it understands that we cannot simply focus on one area where there might be anti-Semitism. We have to be united. We have to combat it wherever it raises its ugly head. And as important as those statistics are, I'll just finish with this. You wouldn't be here in Washington. You wouldn't have taken time away from your jobs and your families to come here if you didn't, if you didn't feel this in your heart. The message that you brought to Capitol Hill today to our colleagues, to encourage them to get behind this effort the same way that we have, that's what's so important for our colleagues to hear. I'm grateful to you for the work that you did today. I'm grateful to all of you for the work that ADL does every day, and really honored to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. And Representative Veasey.
Thank you very much. It is great to be with you this afternoon, and so glad that so many people have come to talk about how we can combat anti-Semitism in this country. I think that anti-Semitism in this country has been a problem for a a long time. And that's especially my view coming from Texas and just hearing certain things that people say very routinely. And I think that it's important that we have more forums like this so we can have these discussions and sort of bring a lot of this to the surface. I think that anti-Semitism is getting a lot of attention now, but like I said, I think it really has been a problem for quite some time, something that we haven't been talking about, maybe for a lot of different reasons, maybe because it makes people uncomfortable. But it's time that we start having more conversations, more discussions about this so people can truly understand it. I think that sometimes there are people that are anti-Semitic and say anti-Semitic things, and quite frankly, they don't even, but just because it's been such a part of their system for so long, they really don't understand it. I know that as a Black American, that I've heard people say things about me before, and I realized that they just really, they really didn't get it. Like it's been a part of the way how they speak for so long, and the way how they articulate for so long, that they just don't really understand it until it's really like brought to their attention. I think the other important thing too that's really, that needs to be discussed more, or at least I think it needs to be pointed out, that I think is a big problem, is that when people think that it's okay to choose when you're going to talk about anti-Semitism and when you're going to speak out against anti-Semitism. I think that it's bad when you don't speak out about anti-Semitism here in the US, but you do speak out about anti-Semitism as it relates to Israel. That is bad. You cannot do that. You have to speak out on both. I think that is bad when you speak out on anti-Semitism here in America, but you turn a blind eye to the Jewish state and anti-Semitism as it relates to Israel. You can't have one way or the other. Anytime you hear anti-Semitic remarks or comments being made, you have to speak out and say that it's unacceptable and that it's not right, and that people can have disagreements about things without the rhetoric turning ugly. And so that's my hope being involved with the task force, coming here today, is that I can be a voice of reason and understanding when it comes to the issue of anti-Semitism. As someone that has felt the sting of racism his entire life, quite frankly, that if I can be a part of helping make this world a better place as it relates to anti-Semitism, then I want to be a part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Congressman Weber.
Well, it's an honor to be here, and I could sit and listen to Marc all day, and like a lot of you, I thought I was going to have to. So. He makes a great point. Listen, and to my good friend from Florida, his point about you're honoring the co-chairs. By doing that, you're honoring ADL and what y'all have known for so long, and I love the heart example, Ted, because you know what's right and what's wrong, and you've stood up. The reason you're here, the reason you stand up against this, to whom much is given, much is required. We have a lot of work to do. I'm glad to be here to link arms with my colleagues, to link arms with you. We've got your back. I know you've got our back. Thank you for honoring ADL in this event today. I appreciate being here.
And Representative Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, thank you so much, ADL, for all that you do. And I don't want it to be lost upon anybody here how important these gatherings are. If every member of Congress is doing his or her job, we're going to be listening to the people that eat, sleep, and breathe these issues every single day. We need you. We need you to educate us, to keep us informed. I love seeing the kids in the audience. They are always our best advocates to get them involved. And as an FBI agent for 14 years, we saw bigotry and hatred every single day. That's what we went after. When I was in Kiev as an FBI agent, we saw how real it was there throughout Eurasia. And we see how real it is here in the United States. Since ADL has been tracking this data going back to the 70s, 2018 recorded the third highest number of anti-Semitic hate crimes. Since they've been recording that data, that is a very, very troubling trend. The BDS movement that is cropping up across the country in colleges and universities is a very troubling trend. And that's something that we need to be vigilant about. And we need to get to the genesis of what the problem is. And the genesis is ignorance. Ignorance combined with hatred. It's a very, very dangerous combination. That's why education, nipping that in the bud as early as we can, is so important. So thank you for the work you do.
Thank you. So I know we don't have much time left, but let me start, and whoever wants to take this, a couple of you can. When you see people politicizing the issue, your colleagues, both in the House and Senate, politicizing the issue of combating anti-Semitism, or trying to use it as a wedge instead of trying to build, as you have, a broad bipartisan coalition, what's the most effective way we and you can respond? What might work at this time of intense political polarization and communication by tweet? I don't know if somebody wants to take that on. What's an effective way to go after it?
Sure. Calling that out is really effective. The fact is that when you anyone who tries to politicize anti-Semitism, who sees some potential political gain in pitting one group against another, and ultimately those actions don't help stop hatred. They don't help the Jewish community that's being threatened. They don't build the kind of consensus that's necessary to combat anti-Semitism. And they wind up making it harder for all of us who are committed to doing this work on a bipartisan basis. So the best thing you can do when people attempt to politicize anti-Semitism is to call them out for it and tell them to look to the bipartisan efforts that should be the model, not what you see on stage, but what you see in the audience here today. That's what should guide them. Only by working together are we going to be successful in fighting anti-Semitism and hatred.
Anyone else? Please,
Well, did I mention y'all have our back and we have your back? So when this happens, please make your voices known. We need to do the same. That's very, very important, to stand up and do it loudly, plainly, clearly, without condemning the other person or group or whoever it is, but to make it known that this will never again be tolerated. And to do it in such a way that's thoughtful, that makes the point, and that absolutely says it will not be tolerated. And I think that's what Representative Deutch is saying, and we've experienced that. We've been able to go to people on the floor, not necessarily in the Senate. I don't go over to the lower chamber very often. And I think that's the key, Eileen. That's part of it.
You know, you mentioned the lower chamber. There is no counterpart or equivalent to your bipartisan task force in the Senate. Do you think it'd be feasible or worthwhile for them to start one? Am I putting you on the spot?
Where is Chuck Schumer when you need him?
I would just like everyone to know that this is, I don't want to make any announcements on her behalf, but since I had this conversation with Senator Rosen just a week or so ago, this is a big priority of hers, and she's looking for ways to do exactly this in the Senate.
You know, members of Congress are notoriously busy. You are the Congressman Weber and Fitzpatrick. You chose to, when you could have made so many different choices of your limited time, to become co-chairs of this task force. Why was this at the top of your list?
It was at the top of my list because of the problem we have with hatred and bigotry in all of its forms. And I want to be part of the forces fighting back against that, and also to reemphasize how important bipartisanship is. One of the questions that was asked earlier, how do we respond to people that use or politicize issues or use them as wedges? My view on that is anybody who tries to politicize an issue, anybody that tries to use an issue as a wedge, doesn't really care about that issue. They care about themselves. Because if you cared about the issue and actually solving the problem, if you care about an issue and you want to solve the problem, you understand the value of building relationships, bipartisan relationships, and appealing to the better angels of people's nature. That's how you take the high road and you teach them the right way to act. I think that's the way forward.
And we do want to stand up and make our voices heard. We speak for people who can't. I so love the young people that are being here. This is important, Eileen, extremely important. Those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of that. And there's a slogan, never again. And so it's very important for me. That's why it's the top priority.
When anti-Semitism gets politicized and put in a wedge issue, we find, much to our dismay, that sometimes our friends with whom we agree on 90% of issues, we're having tensions and rifts with. Can you give us some advice? How do we keep our civil rights coalitions, our coalitions against anti-hate, the coalitions where we agree on so many things and yet have some tensions? Any words of wisdom there?
Well, you asked a very tough question, I have to say. Look, I mentioned before that one of the treasures of ADL is that even when I was a kid, I remember ADL fighting for all kinds of things, civil rights in the South. I remember reading a whole story about it, and the people, the Klansmen and whatever, were already talking trash about the ADL. And so this has been a consistency. When I was a little boy growing up in the Bronx, I remember my grandmother's friends all had their numbers on their hands from the Holocaust. It's really important that we call it out as we see it. You know, there are a lot of people who, I sort of joke about it, but it's true, who seem to love Israel but hate Jews. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. And so I think for all of us, we want to call it out wherever we see it. When we were forming this coalition, we wanted very much to make it bipartisan, and we walked around figuring we wanted to be all regions of the country, not just where there were Jews. So it's really, you look back and you see that we've really made tremendous attempts. We've gotten to good places, but there's still a long road to go. You know, in Virginia, in Charlottesville, when you had those despicable white supremacists chanting, "Jews will not replace us," when I first heard it, I said, "What does that mean?" You know, you almost didn't know what it meant, but the hatred there was just so palpable that you couldn't, you couldn't help but see these people and for what they are. And so this is wonderful. We look out in the audience and see so many people. I don't know if I'm just answering your question. I'm sort of rambling, but thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to be here.
I know our time is almost up, and I want to thank you all again, and for the example you are. I don't think that for any vulnerable communities or any minority, whether it's faith, whether it's race, whether it's sexual orientation, whether it's immigrants or refugees, we cannot be safe and survive without democratic pluralism, without democratic institutions, and without coalitions where we come together even where we may disagree on some things. You are exemplars of that. We thank you so much.
Thank you.